Rick Ross told the whole world that 50-cent sneakers were headed straight for a Costco clearance bin. He said it on camera. He laughed while he said it. And then the internet watched those exact same sneakers vanish from every shelf, every website, every single size run. Not in weeks, not in days, not even hours. Seconds. Gone. And what Rick Ross did next, instead of taking the loss quietly like a boss, might go down as the most painful public crash-out hip-hop has witnessed all decade, because instead of going silent, he got louder, sloppier, and more desperate with every single post. And the wildest part of all? 50 Cent barely had to lift a finger. For words. That is all it took. For little words posted on Instagram that detonated like a bomb and turned a sneaker release into a public execution. Sold out, fat boy. If you think you already know this story, trust me, you do not, because buried underneath the jokes and the memes is a 23-year revenge arc, a bankruptcy card that just got thrown back like a live grenade, a secret claim about who really owns Verzuz, and a television power play that proves this war was never actually about music at all. Stay locked in, because by the time we are done here, you're going to understand exactly why the loudest man in Miami suddenly cannot find his voice. Now let me be clear about something before we go any further, because the numbers behind the story are borderline disrespectful. We are talking about a sneaker that first touched pavement in 2003, disappeared for over 2 decades, and then came back in 2026 and reportedly moved 3.6 million pairs worldwide. 3.6 million. Critics and creators all over the internet are now saying the quiet part out loud, that 50 Cent's shoe just outsold Rick Ross's actual album. His album. The thing Rick Ross is supposed to be good at. And once you hear how this whole sequence unfolded, step by step, post by post, you're going to see why even people who cannot stand 50 Cent are being forced to stand up and salute. So let me break down exactly how we got here, because this did not start with a sneaker. This started with a grudge. To really understand what just happened, you have to rewind all the way back to 2003, when the Queen's rapper was arguably the most unstoppable force in the entire music industry. Get Rich or Die Tryin' was printing money, G-Unit was running the streets and the charts at the same time, and Reebok did something almost unheard of at the time. They handed a rapper his own signature sneaker line. Not an athlete. A rapper from South Jamaica, Queens, who had survived 9 bullets and turned the scars into a brand. The G-Unit sneaker was not just merchandise, it was a statement. It told every kid in every hood that you could come from absolutely nothing and still get your name stitched into leather next to the biggest sportswear logos on the planet. And back then, the shoe sold out all over the world. It was everywhere. If you were outside in 2003, you remember exactly what that felt like. But then time passed. The sneaker disappeared. The music cooled off. And somewhere along the way, the narrative around 50 Cent shifted from rapper to businessman, from mixtape menace to television mogul. Power, BMF, the whole G-Unit film and television empire. Most artists fade when their records stop selling. He just changed arenas. And that right there is the part his enemies never want to talk about, because it ruins the story they have been trying to tell about him for 15 years. Fast forward to now. Reebok announces the return of the G-Unit G6, the revival of that iconic 2003 silhouette, and before the shoe even hits the site, before a single pair has sold, Rick Ross decides to get in front of it. And this is where the self-destruction begins, because Rick Ross did not just doubt the shoe. He mocked it. He clowned it. He went on record saying these sneakers were going to end up in Costco, baby, sitting in a warehouse next to bulk paper towels and discount rotisserie chickens. He even tried to be slick about it, telling 50 Cent to give Lloyd Banks his own high top instead, acting like he was offering business advice, while the whole internet could see the disrespect dripping off every word. And then Rick Ross went further. He started questioning the entire foundation of his rival's fame. He basically said, if those follower numbers are not inflated, why can't these same people sell anything outside of music? Why can't their sneakers sell? Why can't their liquor sell? Why does everything they touch outside of a recording booth fail? He was not just betting against the G6. He was standing on a stage announcing to the world that his entire empire was smoke and mirrors, inflated numbers, bots, and illusion. That was the claim. That was the energy. Remember it, because every single word of it is about to boomerang. Now here is the thing about betting against 50 Cent in public. He does not argue with you in real time. He waits. He lets you talk. He lets you get comfortable, lets you stack your jokes, lets you trend for a day or two. And then he lets the scoreboard do the talking. Because when that G-Unit G6 actually dropped, the internet witnessed something that almost never happens in an era where everything is hype and nothing is real. The sneakers sold out instantly. Not in a marketing spin kind of way where the brand claims a sellout 3 days later. Tony Yeo himself said pairs were gone in 5 minutes, and other voices in the culture swore it was even faster than that. Seconds, literally seconds, before every size was wiped clean off the Reebok website. Grown men were refreshing pages like it was a PlayStation restock. People who were not even sneakerheads were panic-buying pairs just to say they had a piece of it. And this is where the story flips from a sneaker release into a full-blown humiliation ritual, because the culture immediately remembered what Rick Ross had said. Costco, baby. Nobody is buying those. Inflated numbers. The internet does not forget, and it definitely does not forgive, and within hours the quotes were being screenshotted, stitched, remixed, and thrown right back in Rick Ross's face from every direction. One creator after another started lining up to give 50 Cent his flowers, and not the polite kind either. The loud kind. The kind where people were saying things like, "Y'all forgot that 50 Cent is a marketing genius. The man dropped the sneakers and the sneakers sold out in seconds, not minutes, seconds." And my personal favorite, the one that spread like wildfire, was people pointing out the beautiful hypocrisy of it all. When the shoe flops, it is proof that 50 Cent is washed. But when the shoe sells out instantly, suddenly it must be bots. Suddenly 50 Cent bought all his own sneakers. The goalposts were not just moved, they were loaded onto a truck and driven to another state. Even people who openly admitted they were tight about missing the drop were giving respect, calling the G6 a classic piece of New York history, the kind of shoe you put on a shelf behind glass. And there was this one sentiment that kept echoing everywhere, that New York never stopped rocking with 50 Cent, no matter what the internet narrative says, and the proof is not in the tweets, it is in the receipts. A sellout is a sellout. Money is money. And 23 years after the original, a man who is supposedly washed just moved millions of pairs of a grown man sneaker in a market dominated by Jordans and luxury designer collabs aimed at kids half his age. So with the whole internet clowning him, with creators lining up to crown him a marketing genius, you would think Rick Ross would go quiet, regroup, maybe let the news cycle pass. Right? Wrong. And what he did instead is where this goes from funny to genuinely uncomfortable. Because right on schedule, 50 Cent applied the pressure first, and he did it with the precision of a surgeon. Instead of ranting, instead of making a 20-minute video, he posted a simple question that was somehow more violent than any diss track. He wanted to know why the CEO was so quiet. That was it. Why is the CEO so quiet? And if you know anything about this rivalry, you know that calling Rick Ross the CEO in that moment was not a compliment. It was a knife wrapped in a joke, a direct reference to the title Rick Ross has built his entire persona around, being used as a taunt at the exact moment the scoreboard said the man was winning. And the internet lost its mind, because the question was not really a question. It was an invitation. 50 Cent was publicly wondering where all that Costco energy went. And this is the moment where a smart man logs off. A smart man lets it breathe. But Rick Ross is not wired that way, and honestly, that has always been both his superpower and his curse. So instead of silence, the Miami rapper grabbed his phone, hit record, and delivered what might be the most damaging cell phone of his entire career. Because rather than concede the sellout, rather than tip his cap, Rick Ross stood in front of the camera and accused the man of lying about the whole thing. He said, "Why are you telling people you sold all those shoes? Stop lying." And then he reached back more than a decade and pulled the card he always reaches for, the bankruptcy card, reminding everybody that his rival once filed a bankruptcy worth $100 million, claiming it was just an endorsement deal. Claiming no reseller was moving the pairs, claiming nobody was actually buying them. He even attacked the outfit from the Verzuz stage, telling him he needs a stylist. And then he repeated the line that is going to haunt him, that ain't nobody buying those ugly shoes. Now, let that sink in for a second. The shoes sold out in seconds. That is a documented, verifiable fact, witnessed by thousands of frustrated buyers staring at empty checkout pages. And his official response was to look directly into the camera and declare that the sellout never happened. That is not confidence anymore. That is not trolling. That is a man standing in the rain insisting it is sunny. And the internet noticed immediately, because the tone of the conversation shifted from jokes to something closer to secondhand embarrassment. People were not laughing with Rick Ross anymore. They were starting to laugh at him, and worse, some were starting to feel that uncomfortable feeling you get when you realize someone genuinely cannot stop themselves. But hold on, because we have not even reached the craziest part yet. Because the man was not done. Not even close. See, woven into this sneaker war was a whole separate battlefield, the Verzuz stage. For those who need the context, 50 Cent recently popped out at a Verzuz event alongside Joe, going up against Darnell Jones, and by most accounts it was a moment. A real moment. The kind of surprise appearance that reminds people why 50 Cent's name still rings bells decades into his career. And let me just say this, because it matters for later. Joe, by all accounts, absolutely destroyed Darnell Jones that night. That is not even the controversial part. The controversial part is what Rick Ross did with that moment afterward. Because after the G6 sold out and after his Costco prophecy collapsed in front of millions of people, the Miami mogul pivoted. And the pivot was to claim, on camera, that he owns equity in Verzuz. Think about the implications of that for a second. Rick Ross looked at his rival's triumphant Verzuz appearance and reframed the entire thing as a business transaction where he, Rick Ross, was the real winner. Because if he truly owns a piece of the platform, then the man performing there for free was, in his framing, 50 Cent working for him. He literally said it. Thanks for your employment. He called the man, Curtis Jackson, his employee. He even spun a whole conspiracy theory out of it, claiming the reason the G-Unit boss never did a Verzuz against T.I. was because 50 knew Rick Ross had a stake in the platform, and that the only reason 50 showed up this time was out of love for Joe. Now, I am going to keep it completely honest with you here, because you deserve that. On the surface, that is actually a clever chess move. If it is true, it is the kind of reframing that wins arguments on the internet, turning your enemy's victory parade into your own payroll event. But here is the problem. Nobody can verify it. There is no paperwork, no filing, no announcement anywhere confirming Rick Ross holds equity in Verzuz, and in the absence of proof, the claim does not land like a chess move. It lands like a coping mechanism. It lands like a man who just watched his enemy sell out a sneaker in seconds and desperately needed, some angle where he was still the boss of something. And the culture smelled it instantly. The same week he says nobody is buying the shoes sell out. The same week he says 50 Cent is irrelevant, 50 Cent shuts down a Verzuz stage. And the response to all of it is, well, actually, I own the stage. Come on, man. Even his own fans were in the comments asking him to please just log off. And meanwhile, while Rick Ross was speedrunning a public meltdown, do you know what 50 Cent was doing? Winning. Quietly, loudly, methodically, on every front simultaneously. And this is the part that I think genuinely broke Rick Ross, because it was not just the sneakers. First, there was the victory lap itself. The man did not write an essay. He did not make a documentary. He posted 4 words. Sold out, fat boy. That is it. That is the whole post. And I need you to appreciate the craftsmanship of that, because in the entire history of this beef, his deadliest weapon has never been anger. It has been brevity. For words that did 3 things at once. It confirmed the sellout to the whole world. It humiliated Rick Ross by name-calling him like it was 2009 again. And it framed the entire exchange as beneath him, like he was swatting a fly while doing something more important. Within hours, that post was everywhere. Blogs, reaction videos, memes, talk shows. DJ Who Kid, Tony Yayo, the whole G-Unit orbit was amplifying it. The sneaker that was supposed to rot in a Costco was suddenly the biggest footwear story in the culture, and Rick Ross's name was attached to it permanently, but as the punchline. And then, because the man understands momentum better than almost anyone alive, he stacked the next announcement right on top of it. While the internet was still feasting on the sneaker story, news broke that 50 Cent is officially moving forward with a paid-in-full television series. Paid in Full. One of the most beloved street films ever made, the blueprint for an entire generation's understanding of Harlem's dope era, the story of AZ, Alpo, and Rich Porter. And he is not slapping his name on it as a passive producer either. He revealed he has been personally on the phone about it, that he brought in Michael, the writer behind Brooklyn's Finest, to pen the first pass, that the season arc and the first episode are already done, and that he is taking the package to Miramax to get it moving. He even described the creative vision in detail, slowing the story down to explore the human side of the choices, letting the audience watch the jealousy grow between the characters until the inevitable explosion. Let that sequence marinate. In the same stretch of days, 50 Cent sold out a sneaker faster than most modern athletes sell their signature shoes, turned his biggest hater into a global laughingstock with 4 words, reminded everyone of his dominance on a Verzuz stage, and announced he is resurrecting one of the most sacred street classics in hip-hop cinema for television. That is not luck. That is a man playing a completely different game than the person throwing shots at him. Now, to fully appreciate how we got to this exact moment, you have to understand that none of this is random. This war is old. This war is deep. And this war has never, not even for a single year since it started, actually ended. The roots of this thing stretch all the way back to the late 2000s, when the man from Queens was at the absolute peak of his powers and decided, for reasons that mixed business with something far more personal, to make an example out of the Miami rapper. What followed was one of the most lopsided and creative campaigns of humiliation the genre has ever seen. There were diss records. There were viral videos. There were stunts so elaborate that people still talk about them with a kind of disbelief, because nobody before or since has weaponized trolling quite like that. And the through line of that entire era, the lesson that was supposed to be seared into everyone's memory, was simple. He does not engage in beefs the way other artists do. He treats them like hostile takeovers. He studies the target, finds the single pressure point that cannot heal, and then applies pressure to it forever. Not for a week. Not for a news cycle. Forever. And the pressure point he found back then was authenticity. The entire attack was built around the idea that the boss persona was a costume, that the stories were borrowed, that the image was manufactured. Fair or not, that attack worked because it stuck to him for the rest of his career. Every win since then has been shadowed by it. And here is the crucial thing that explains everything happening right now. When a man spends 15 years being told he is fake, he develops a reflex. Anytime the culture celebrates his rival, the reflex fires. He cannot help it. He has to respond. He has to poke holes in the celebration, because in his mind, letting the win stand unchallenged means letting the old narrative die, and he cannot allow that. That is the psychology underneath every single post. The Costco joke was not about sneakers. It was a preemptive strike against a comeback story he could see forming on the horizon. He smelled the nostalgia wave building. He knew the G6 was going to be a moment, and he tried to poison the well before a single drop was sold. And for about a week, it actually worked. The jokes landed. The timeline laughed. And then the sneakers went on sale. Let me paint you a picture of what happened next from the business side, because this is the part that elevates the story from rap beef to a legitimate case study that marketing professors are going to be teaching. When Reebok first partnered with G-Unit back in the day, the deal was historic for a reason that has nothing to do with shoes. It proved that a hip-hop artist could move product at the level of a professional athlete. That deal cracked the door open for everything that came after, the Yeezys, the Travis Scotts, the entire modern economy of rapper-driven footwear. So when the brand decided to bring the G6 back, it was not a random nostalgia cash grab. It was a calculated bet that the culture's memory was an untapped market. And the genius of the rollout was restraint. There was no massive billboard campaign. There was no desperate influencer seeding. The announcement was allowed to breathe. The haters were allowed to talk. The Costco clip was allowed to circulate and build resistance. And then the product hit the site and the market gave its answer. That is the part that should terrify anyone on the other side of this. The opposition's mockery was not an obstacle to the launch. It was the marketing. Every joke became a receipt waiting to be cashed. Every prediction of failure became fuel. The hate literally drove traffic, and the traffic converted into a sellout measured in seconds. And can we talk about the bots argument for one more second, because it deserves to be dismantled properly. The claim is that the sellout was manufactured, that automated buyers cleaned out the inventory, and the demand is fake. Now, here's why that argument collapses under its own weight. Bots exist on every major sneaker release on Earth. Every Jordan drop, every Yeezy drop, every limited release of any kind fights the same bot war. If bots buying out stock invalidated a sellout, then no sneaker has ever sold out in history, and the entire resale market is a hallucination. The bot boogeyman only ever gets invoked in one direction, as a way to discount the wins of a specific person. When a beloved artist sells out instantly, it is demand. When this man sells out instantly, suddenly everyone becomes a cybersecurity expert. That double standard is not analysis. It is cope dressed up as skepticism. And the market has already answered the only question that matters. Pairs are being worn, posted, unboxed, and resold at premium prices by real human beings who waited on real cues. The receipts have receipts. And then there is the angle almost nobody is talking about, which is the Lloyd Banks detail hidden inside the mockery. Think about how layered that actually was. In the same breath used to predict the shoe would rot in a warehouse, There was this little suggestion that Banks should have gotten his own high top instead. On the surface, it sounds like praise for a member of the crew. But anyone who has studied this rivalry knows exactly what that move is. It is an attempt to fracture the unit from the inside, to plant a seed of division, to get the comments section arguing about who deserved what. It is wedge politics applied to a rap group. And the beautiful irony is how completely it failed, because when the shoe sold out, the very first people celebrating in public were the G-Unit soldiers themselves. Tony Yayo was out front crowing about the 5-minute sellout. DJ Who Kid was amplifying every headline. The unit closed ranks instantly and publicly, and the wedge splintered on contact. That is what 2 decades of loyalty looks like, and it is the one asset on the board that no amount of trolling has ever been able to touch. Now zoom out even further, because there is a reason this story hit the culture like a lightning strike instead of a routine rap squabble, and it has everything to do with timing. We are living through a moment where the entire entertainment industry is being run by algorithms, focus groups, and corporate risk management. Albums are focus grouped. Rollouts are sanitized. Beefs are settled quietly by lawyers and publicists behind closed doors. And into that sterile environment walks a rivalry from a different era, a genuinely personal, genuinely funny, genuinely petty war between 2 men who clearly do not like each other and do not care who knows it. The culture is starving for this. That is why every post became a headline. That is why a 4-word Instagram caption outdrew album rollouts. People are not just watching a beef, they are watching the last surviving artifact of a time when hip-hop feuds were played out in public with creativity and malice instead of in conference rooms. Love him or hate him, the man from Queens is the final boss of that era, still active, still sharp, still undefeated in the one arena he actually cares about. And on the other side of the battlefield, the silence problem is compounding by the day. Here is the trap the Miami rapper built for himself, and it is a masterpiece of unintended consequences. If he responds again, he feeds the story and confirms the obsession. If he goes quiet, the question that was planted, why is the CEO so quiet, keeps trending without him. There is no third door. Every option is a loss, and that is not an accident. That is design. That is what 20 years of studying one specific opponent buys you. He knew exactly which button to press, exactly how long the response would take, and exactly how it would land. And the cruelest detail of all is that the bait was 4 words long. No beat, no studio time, no budget. A caption. That is the cost asymmetry of this entire war in miniature. One side is spending energy, credibility, and goodwill. The other side is spending nothing and compounding. And this brings us to the part of the story that nobody wants to say out loud, but I will. The contrast between these 2 men right now is not just stark. It is becoming genuinely painful to watch. Because if you zoom out and look at the totality of where 50 Cent and Rick Ross stand in 2026, the gap is no longer debatable. He has a television empire that keeps expanding. He has a spirits business that actually sells. He has a sneaker that just pulled off a historic comeback. He has cultural goodwill at an all-time high, with even his critics admitting the marketing genius label is earned. And on the other side, you have Rick Ross, a legitimately talented artist with real classics under his belt, spending his week insisting a verified sellout was fake, claiming unprovable equity in a platform his rival just electrified, and watching the internet compare his album sales to a shoe. A shoe, y'all. People are literally out here saying the G6 outsold the music. Whether that comparison is fair or not almost does not matter, because the fact that it is being said at all, and being believed, tells you everything about where the momentum lives right now. And look, I want to be fair here for a second, because somebody has to ask the uncomfortable question. Is there a version of this where Rick Ross is not crazy? Let's steelman it for a moment. The bankruptcy point, while old, is a real thing that happened. The man did file Chapter 11 back in 2015 amid lawsuits, and Rick Ross has been weaponizing that fact for years. The equity claim about Verzuz, while unverified, is at least theoretically possible. These platforms have complicated ownership structures and quiet investors exist. And the reseller argument, the idea that hype sellouts do not always equal real consumer demand, is a legitimate debate in sneaker culture because bots are real and resellers do distort drops. So on paper, individually, each of Rick Ross's points has some kernel of substance buried inside it. But here is why it all falls apart anyway. Timing and pattern. Because when you stack every one of those arguments back to back, delivered in a panicked flurry immediately after getting publicly embarrassed, they stop reading like analysis and start reading like triage. A confident man makes one of those points calmly and moves on. Rick Ross made all of them at once, escalating with each post, and that desperation is exactly what 50 Cent was counting on. That is the trap. He did not need to prove his rival wrong. He just needed to win visibly and then stand there quietly, because he has always known, that the Miami rapper cannot metabolize a public loss. He will talk himself into a deeper hole every single time. And that is exactly what happened. The forward post was not the attack. It was bait. And Rick Ross swallowed the whole hook, the line, and half the fishing rod. And now the narrative has fully inverted. A week ago, Rick Ross was the loud one, the one predicting failure, the one calling shots. Today, the entire culture is asking a very different question, the same question 50 Cent planted with surgical precision. Why is the CEO so quiet? And the truth is, Rick Ross is not quiet. He is worse than quiet. He is loud and losing, which in the economy of hip-hop credibility is the most expensive thing you can be. Every time he posts, he confirms the L. Every time he explains, he looks smaller. And the man, who has spent 20 years perfecting the art of psychological warfare, from Ja Rule to every rival since, knows that the cruelest thing he can do now is absolutely nothing. Just let the scoreboard glow. And the scoreboard is glowing, y'all. Because the sneaker was just the appetizer. If Paid in Full lands the way the Power Universe landed, 50 Cent will have pulled off something almost no rapper in history has ever done, building a second legacy in a second medium that eclipses the first, while still finding time to sell millions of sneakers on the side. Meanwhile, his rival's most talked about moment of the year is a Costco joke that aged like milk in the sun. That is the reality. I do not make the news, I just break it down. There is also a conversation happening in the sneaker world itself that deserves your attention, because it reveals who actually won the week in the only currency that cannot be spun. Collectors are already calling the G6 restock one of the defining nostalgia drops of the decade. Resale prices climbed immediately, which is the market's way of voting with real money. And perhaps most telling of all, the demographic breakdown of who bought the shoe tells a story that cuts right through the mockery. It was not just 40-somethings reliving 2003. It was their kids. It was 20-year-olds who discovered the music through the television universe and wanted a piece of the origin story. That is the nightmare scenario for the other side, because it means the brand is not aging out. It is regenerating. A second generation is buying in, and they are buying in through the very channels, the shows, the films, the cultural footprint that the rival camp has spent years dismissing as irrelevant. Every sneaker on a young foot is a billboard for the empire, and the empire just announced it is expanding into one of the most sacred stories in the culture's history. And about that television announcement, because I do not think the weight of it has fully landed yet. Paid in Full is not just another project. Within the culture, that film is scripture. The story of Alpo, Rich Porter, and AZ is woven into the DNA of East Coast hip-hop, referenced in hundreds of records, quoted like scripture, treated with a reverence usually reserved for the classics of cinema. Announcing that you are the one trusted to expand that story, that you personally recruited the pen behind Brooklyn's finest, that the season arc is already locked and a major studio meeting is the next step, is a flex of a completely different magnitude than a sneaker. It is a statement about who the industry trusts with the culture's crown jewels. And notice the timing again. The announcement did not come in a vacuum. It came in the middle of the loudest attempted sabotage of his year, and it rendered the sabotage invisible. While one man was arguing about shoe sales, the other was being handed the keys to Harlem's most legendary narrative. That is the definition of playing different sports on the same field. So when you stack the entire week up and lay it out flat, here is what the ledger actually says. On one side, a verified worldwide sellout measured in seconds, a viral forward victory lap that the entire culture adopted as a catchphrase, a dominant stage appearance, a wave of public support from creators across the spectrum, and the announcement of a prestige television project with a serious writer attached. On the other side, a Costco joke that aged into a meme within days, a denial video that convinced almost no one, an unverifiable ownership claim that even sympathetic commentators struggled to defend, an outfit critique that landed like a pebble, and a comment section full of his own fans begging him to put the phone down. That is not a rivalry in its prime. That is a rout. And the scariest part for the losing side is that none of it required the winner to break a sweat, book a studio, or even say a name out loud. He posted a question and a caption. The machine did the rest. And here is one more layer that makes this whole saga hit different, and it is the part casual observers always miss. This was never really a fight between two rappers. It is a fight between two business models. On one side, you have a model built on diversification, where music is just the front door and the real empire lives in television, spirits, footwear, and licensing. On the other side, you have a model built almost entirely on the persona itself, where the brand is the music, the image, the aura of the boss. And here is the brutal math underneath that difference. A diversified empire can absorb a bad week because one vertical winning covers another vertical stalling. A persona-based empire cannot, because when the persona takes damage, everything takes damage at once. That is why one man can laugh off a joke about his shoes, and the other man had to respond like the joke was a threat to his entire existence. For him, it was. And that explains the temperature of every response we have watched unfold. When your whole value lives in being seen as untouchable, being touched is an emergency. Every unanswered slight is a withdrawal from the only account you have. And that is the asymmetry that keeps deciding this war, year after year, chapter after chapter. One side treats these exchanges as entertainment, as marketing, as free promotion with a pulse. The other side treats them as existential. And in any fight, the person who needs it less always has the advantage, because they are the only one who can walk away. Look at the body language of the whole thing. One man posts 4 words and goes back to building a television slate. The other posts video after video, explaining, denying, reframing, reaching back a decade for ammunition. Those are not the behaviors of two equals exchanging fire. That is the behavior of a landlord and a tenant arguing about who owns the building. There is a lesson in that for every artist watching, and, honestly, for anyone building anything. Guard the scoreboard, not the argument. Arguments are cheap, infinite, and forgettable. Scoreboards are expensive, rare, and permanent. The culture can debate motives all day, but it cannot debate a sellout. It cannot debate a season order from a major studio, and it cannot debate 23 years of relevance compounding on itself. That is the real story hiding underneath all the noise this week. Not a sneaker. Not a caption. A masterclass in making your enemies finance your marketing with their own outrage, and then sending them a thank you note in the form of a 4-word caption. So now I am throwing it to y'all, because this is where it gets interesting, and I genuinely want to hear where the culture stands on this one. Question 1, and be honest, does Rick Ross actually own a piece of Verzuz, making this the coldest chess move of the year, or was that the most transparent cope we have ever seen from a man who could not handle watching his rival win? Question 2, who is really winning this war when you look at the whole board, because both of these men are rich, both are legends in their own lane, but only one of them spent this week turning a sneaker into a statement. And question 3, the one I am most curious about, is this beef even good for Rick Ross anymore, or has he become the villain in a story where the audience already picked their hero? Get in the comments and let me know, because the way this is escalating, I promise you this is not the last video we are making about these two. And if 50 Cent's track record tells us anything, the next move is already loaded. It always is. This is a man who turned a gunshot into a brand, a bankruptcy into a punchline he controlled, and a 23-year-old sneaker into a worldwide sellout. Rick Ross should have learned what everyone before him learned the hard way. You do not bet against Curtis Jackson in public. You just do not. And if Rick Ross keeps posting, if he keeps swinging, if he keeps insisting the rain is sunshine, then trust me, you're going to want to be locked in right here when the next chapter drops. Because he has never once in his career let a wounded rival walk away without one more reminder. Smash that like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you are new, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a breakdown, because this story is nowhere near finished, and neither is he. Salute.